Alrighty, guys. So let's begin with this class. We're going to talk about the Cold War, and as we already saw, and you have that homework that is due today about the Berlin blockade. All right. Now we're going to see the three hot spots of the Cold War. That can be your topic. Okay, the three hot spots of the Cold War. Because if we were explaining that during the Cold War, we named it like that precisely because there was no open confrontation between the USSR and the USA. Well, that's not the most accurate term for talking about this period of time. Okay, we talked about that very importantly. They had proxy and satellite countries. That means that even though they didn't confront each other, they were fighting each other, but through other puppet governments. You know, like in Korea, for example, we're going to see the first conflict that happened from 1950 to 1953, and you have to pay very, very close attention because the homework for this week is going to be about the three hot spots of the Cold War, namely Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right? The three moments in which the whole world thought there was going to be a third world war. Everybody believed that peace was not going to last very long, that we were going to have a third world war. Okay, so remember that the main confrontation, the main issue here is the opposing ideologies between the democratic regimes and the communist regimes. They were, by definition, opposing each other. They were opposing forces, and that's why we signed the NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Warsaw Pact correspondingly. Okay, one aligning all the countries on the democratic capitalist side, and the others aligning behind the USSR, representing the communist countries. Okay, we were gonna call those, the Eastern European countries, the Iron Curtain. All right. So the first conflict that almost broke into a third world war was the Korean War, and that little piece of land that you can see there is Korea. Okay, it's gonna be divided exactly in half by this war. Now, Kim Il-sung governs in the north, Syngman Rhee governs in the south. Okay, what was going on? If you look at a map, Korea is very, very close to China, and China had just gone through this revolution. In 1949, Mao Zedong, okay, he gets to power. And when he gets to power, he installs a communist regime, dictatorial regime, and he imposes the Republic of China being communist, being totally communist. And since China is a very big power in Asia, it's going to help, or it's going to unite or align behind Russia, and they're going to pretend they're like the conquerors, the ideological conquerors of the world, and so they're going to try to gain more countries to turn communist. And that's precisely what they did with the ones that were surrounding China. China has frontiers with a lot of countries because it's a huge piece of land. Okay, so in Mao's revolution in 1949, China turns communist, and so aligning with its brother nation, Russia, they're going to want to convert all these people around them to communism. Okay, and the first one was the invasion, the ideological invasion of Korea. When United States realizes Korea is almost lost to the ideology of communism, they react by sending troops. They react by providing them with a lot of support, economic and military support, so that they don't get invaded. And that's how the country Korea starts being divided. Okay, it starts being divided into two. The northern part of Korea is going to turn communist. And as a matter of fact, until this date, they're still communist. and the southern part is going to become capitalist. In that little frontier, we're going to have the most outrageous breakout of war. Okay? In any moment, you can ask me any questions, please. I'm going to look for the parallel because I don't know if it comes in the presentation. Okay, so basically it's a parallel 38. You know that the world map has parallels and it has tropics. Okay, and well, they serve us so that we can distinguish some temperature changes, some climates that are given at some parts of the distancing from the equator, and some of them blah blah blah, how they're very close to the Antarctica, and that's going to will give us a lot of information about climates and diversity, ecological diversity, animal diversity, and basically like the climate changes. Okay, but and also the hour changes. So we have the parallels are like this in a horizontal logic, and the tropics are like this. Okay, we have the Cancer tropic, and we have the number of parallels by degree. So at parallel 38, we're going to have the main conflict in the Korean War. Okay, now here we have the prototype. A prototype is like the first one, the first conflict during this very important period of time, and we're gonna have the model of how the rest of the conflicts are going to break out. For example, the puppet government. It was very usual that when the United States would intervene in a conflict, they would install a puppet government. A puppet is like a un títere, right? So even though the president of the southern part of Korea had to be Korean, had to be a nationalistic, well, the reality is that he was in control of the USA government, right? Let me silence. Okay, perfect. All right. And well, as we explained, they were very afraid, the United States and its allies, they were very afraid of the domino theory. That domino theory stated that whenever a country would turn communist, then as a domino effect, the little pieces were going to clash against each other, and they were going to unleash like the crumble down of all the communist world. And they were very scared because communism was very strong back in those days. They were very, very scared, and they were very concerned that all the countries, the main countries, would become communist. And they had to stop it no matter what. That's why they even adventured themselves on their military to go to Korea, even though it was a unknown land. It was a conflict that obviously was not of their concern. And in spite of all these reasons for not going, they had the perfect reasons for not even like looking at the conflict. They decided to go and to intervene and to send American soldiers. And you know that people in America are very jealous of the soldiers. They only want to fight the fights that belong to them. They are not really much into like lending lives of their soldiers from their military to fight all their nation's war. And one of the reasons is because of these three conflicts. Okay, so here it is. Hold on. It's Amanda. Maybe she's entering our class in a few seconds. Okay, now at the same time, we're gonna have the Suez crisis. Okay, we're gonna have the Suez crisis. Let me just check if we are. Hold on. Yes, that's fine. Okay. You can see me like a ghost, but you can see me. Okay, now there's the Suez crisis. Now we're going to move from the other side of the world. Okay, we're going to move down And we're gonna go to Egypt. Okay, this is Northern Africa. Another very big conflict happens there. And we don't count it as one of the three hotspots of the Cold War. Remember, the three hotspots of the Cold War are namely the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War. The Suez Crisis is only a crisis, okay? It's going to happen from 1956 to 1957. This period of time are going to be of a lot of conflict. They're going to be hot times. Nothing more, nothing further than peaceful was this period of time. Okay, so if you can see in the Suez Canal is going to happen exactly what happens in the Panama Channel. In the Panama Channel, the French started the digging, and then the Americans and the English bought off the French construction, and they finished and they kept the Panama Canal. Now, the same thing happened like 50 years before in Egypt. Okay, now you know that the Sinai Peninsula, as you can see in the map, is a very thin mass of land compared to the continent of Africa and the continent of Asia. So for sea routes and for sea vessels and all these merchandising, the merchant routes, okay, it was very convenient that we had a channel there. Just as the Panama Canal, we wanted a channel there, because see how we have the Gulf of Suez, and then if we did a little digging on the Suez Canal, okay, we would create a passage from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. And in that way, I wouldn't have to go all the way around Africa, so that I can deliver to India and to China. And, well, who controls the canal, who controls the channel, the Suez Canal, then, well, it would have an advantage over the other nations in terms of commercial matters. Okay, so this was a big fight between England trying to conquer this part of the world again, and the ones that were independent. Now, Egypt did not need any help from the Allies. I mean, obviously they received an offer, but at that time they had a very, very strong leader, and well, they fought their war, and they kind of like won over the control of the Suez Canal, and they kicked the British and the Americans out. So when the rest of the world saw the outcome of the Suez Crisis, and how a small country, small politically speaking, because in resources and in culture and in everything, every other way, Egypt is very, very strong. I mean, when all the countries watch Egypt winning over the Allies, they gain courage, they gain a lot of morale, and they were not going to let the Allies come and go as they please. They were going to face them. And these little countries' triumph was one of the reasons why all these other nations decided to stand up to the United States and to the Allies, to Great Britain, France, and, well, not Russia anymore. Okay, so that was something else. We're gonna skip that. Now, in all the continent, the European continent, we have upheavals and uprisings. In Hungary, we have in 1956 these uprising. Okay, people wanted to be self-determined, and they wanted to have elections. They did not want the USSR governing over them anymore. So this could lead to the end of the communist rule in Hungary. All these countries are trying to gain their liberty, to gain their independence again. Okay, again. And so that was one of the other iconic points in the Cold War. So we have the Mao's uprising to power. We have the first hotspot, which is the Korean War. We have the Berlin airlift, the blockade. We have the Hungarian uprising and the Suez Canal crisis. Okay, and now in the arms race thingy and the space race, we're gonna have that the first ones that got in outer space were the Russians, and that's gonna hurt but with real pain, the United States pride. Okay, they're going to be very, very jealous of their advancements, especially in the space race. So the first ones that put a satellite in outer space were the Russians, beating forever the United States. That's why the United States made such a big deal about landing in the moon first. Even if it's true, if it's a conspiracy theory, if Neil Armstrong did exist or he was a hologram, I mean, we don't know for sure anything, okay? But the thing is that they took these very, very, very seriously. All right? That's the Sputnik flying over there. And well, forever and ever, you know, the Russians have beaten America in space. They have the technological edge. And that's Nixon, Richard Nixon, and Khrushchev, which was the president, the prime minister of Russia, the USSR, after Stalin dies. Stalin dies in 1953, and Khrushchev takes over. He starts a de-Stalinization process. He didn't quite agree with all the measures that Stalin was imposing the Russians, especially the purges and the elimination of all opposition and the censoring of all mass media. So he starts liberalizing some of these aspects slowly. ¿Qué tal? So even though the Americans had the atomic bombs, well, now the Russians had the outer space dominance, okay? And that's some of the people that were in space and blah, 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 blah. Then Khrushchev, and this is very important because this is leading up to the second big hotspot of the Cold War, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev, on behalf of the USSR, and John F. Kennedy, on behalf of the United States of America, are going to play a very important role. Okay, a very, very important role. I'm going to see if everybody is there. The guy from South Korea is, hold on. Sigmund Rhee. Okay, I'm gonna have to be turning back and forth to the YouTube emission so that I can see what you guys are commenting, and then I'm going to turn back here because I don't know, for some reason that I cannot like have everything in my screen because I'm sharing my screen, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we were saying that John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev are going to be very, very important protagonists of the Cold War, especially for what is building up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. So they meet to discuss in Berlin and the nuclear proliferation. People were very concerned, NATO and the Warsaw Pact and all these other international organizations, they were very, very concerned about the routes or where this space race, not the space race, the atomic and the nuclear race was going to lead the world. Because in any moment the arms, the weapons were topping each other. They were maximizing the destruction power. Technology was advancing undeniably. However, it was for destruction, for mass destruction. And the most powerful thing, or the most desirable thing, was discovering a new weapon or a more powerful killer weapon. So our objectives, our goals were kind of creepy. So they meet to discuss this international war. Every country in the world was wondering if at the click of a button, these two nations had the destruction, the control of destroying all the world. Okay, so Khrushchev is like 25 years older than JFK, and that's why our presentation says that he thinks that JFK is much like way young for the pose that he is trying to play. Now, in America, a lot of people remember that this is the time of the espionage. So a lot of people were jealous, they were suspicious of JFK. For one reason, I mean, it's a very dumb reason. Right now, it wouldn't be a concern. But back in those days, whatever thing that made you suspicious would actually bring you trouble. So JFK was Catholic, and people were joking and they were suspecting that he had a very close tie with the Vatican. And so they were very doubtful of him. And some people say that because of that, because of the good of the nation, they sent somebody to kill him. As you know, he's one of the presidents that doesn't finish his administration because he gets killed in Houston. Okay. And so Nikita Khrushchev, well, a story is told in this way. I'm sorry, guys. I got a sore throat. So I've been in class during the whole morning, and so my throat gets a little bit resentful. Okay, so Nikita Khrushchev obviously has way far more experience than JFK, and so he believes that JFK can be overrun. Can be overrun means that, well, that he's not gonna do anything, that he's like a weak character, that we can play with him for so many reasons. And that is not true. He's gonna be a very, very good one. In 1961, the Berlin Wall goes up. Before the Berlin Wall, we had these little posts where military people were taking care of people not going from one side to the other in Germany, to Western Germany, to Eastern Germany. And so, well, now we have a lot of checkpoints along the frontier, and we build up the wall. Ich bin ein Berliner. I love being from Berlin. That's a visit of President Kennedy in Berlin and trying to make things more peaceful. But on the other side, this is kind of a provocation for the eastern side of Germany. Because the United States represented all this development and economic freedom and absolutely no boundaries. And so, well, the communists that had their people under a lot of control, they were very suspicious of the Americans and of the Western European powers in general. Okay, and that's one picture in 1961 of young Fidel Castro, that they obviously were on the same side. They were fighting on the same side. And well, the alliance is practically logical. And so, in 1961, we're going to have one episode that's going to lead us to what we're going to talk about, the second hotspot of the Cold War, the Bay of Pigs debacle. Okay, so here's the Bay of Pigs, and we have hold on, guys. Hold on a second. Hold on, guys. Something is leaking here. Okay. Okay, guys, so what's going on in the Bay of Pigs? Now, before the Bay of Pigs happens, we have, well, Fidel Castro gets to power, okay? Now, I don't think you know deeply the history of Cuba. We don't need to know that. The only sufficient knowledge that we need to have for Cuba is that before, like 1930, 40 something, it was governed by this guy, which last name was Batista, okay? And he had a dictatorship, and he was serving the United States. At the end, United States wanted Cuba to be kind of like a Puerto Rican, another Puerto Rican island. However, they were not going to give him the rank of being a state. It would only give them, they would only give them like to be a part of the Commonwealth. However, well, some people say it was the casino of the United States, like Havana and Cuba, the island of Cuba was the casino. And so United States control in a very despotic way the economy based on sugar exportation and cultivation of Cuba. They were controlling that. And so people in Cuba were very, very mad at that abuse, because it was obviously abuse. It was like having Cubans as slaves and then taking everything away from them, just like it happened in Panama. You know, like you go there and you make people from their country work, but then you take all the money out of their country and you never give them the status of equals to you. So something like that happens in Cuba. And so that's why Fidel Castro, Raúl Castro, and El Che Guevara are so famous. They were meeting here in Mexico and they did a conspiration to take over the Havana and to take over Cuba. So they succeed, and from that moment on, Fidel Castro becomes the great dictator of Cuba. All right? Because he is the one that frees the land from the imperial power, the unwanted imperial power. So we have Fidel Castro now there, and when Fidel Castro is like 15 years already governing, not even 10 years governing, happens this exact incident, the Bay of Pigs. Now, this paramilitary group, aided and sponsored by the United States of America, tries to get to the Bay of Pigs, La Bahía de Cochinos, in Cuba, which is right here in the map, okay? And they want to get to Havana so that they can debacle Fidel Castro and his government, and they can retake the government of Cuba. Obviously, JFK knew about it, okay? Obviously. However, this is going to be very controversial. That's why they don't succeed. Fidel Castro defends the island, and so he gains more popularity amongst his followers and his Cuban fellow men. And now he is all empowered in the island, and people are willing, like 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it's needed, to die for their leader. And now, in that moment, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. Okay, everybody knows that everything that Khrushchev and JFK were speaking to each other in their face was fake. Okay, it was fake. Neither Khrushchev had the intention of an alliance or a peaceful time with Cuba, and the Cubans did not want anything to do with America whatsoever. So since Cuba is a communist country, they're gonna align behind the USSR, and so they're gonna make like a block, and they're going to confront the United States. Okay, so what is the decision? And with this I finish. The decision that Khrushchev makes is to use the island of Cuba so that we can install medium-range missiles. That is to make Cuba a military base of Russia. Now, the technology had advanced so much back in that day that they had already developed these missiles, these long-range missiles that could go so many and so many kilometers. I'm sorry, kilometers. And so if they install those missiles in the island of Cuba, Washington DC and even New York would be in range. We could attack. I mean, no need to say all the military bases in Texas, all the military bases in Florida, the naval bases, which we have we have important ones in those two locations, Florida and Texas. And then, okay, the longest that they could get was Washington, and that's the capital. I mean, there's only the Pentagon there, but it's not what is there, which are like military offices, but it's what it represents. If we would take, or we would attack, destroy the whole square of Washington DC down by the Potomac River, then it would send a message that we are defeating the United States of America. So the Russians installed these missiles in the island of Cuba, and now we have a problem because one airplane overflies the island. Obviously, it was a spy plane, and they spot the maneuver. And so they tell back in the United States, and the world almost goes to war for the third time. Okay? And I think we're going to finish there because time is up, and maybe you have another class, and we're retaking this. Okay? So you're going to have to do a little homework about this Cuban Missile Crisis, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is basically the same. Okay, we're going to have now in the 38th parallel, no, the 17th parallel, I'm sorry, and we're going to have these people invading each other, and it's the same. It's the same. China is right above all these countries, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and so they want Vietnam to become communist. Vietnam doesn't want to. They resist. The United States knows that they resist, and so that's why they send some military aid to South Vietnam so that they can contain the communist advance, and so on and so forth. Exactly the same as happens in Korea. Okay, but this one is the latest one. This is from 1965 to 1973. All right. So, do you have any questions, guys? Let me see, where are you? If you have no further questions, we say bye. If you have like 30, okay? Goodbye, guys. Thank you, Marielle. I miss you guys a lot. You behave, okay?